Okay, guys, I don't feel very good today, which is why I'm recording this right now the way I'm recording it. I want you to take notes as we go through this. We're going to talk about modern and postmodern art. Because remember, in our entry document, we're doing all this artwork for the Louisiana Modern Museum of Art. Museum of Modern Art, that's in Denmark. So we've got to know what modern and postmodern art look like so that we can make art that is appropriate. So a quick overview. Modern art is a school of art, which means it's kind of like a type of art that has similar characteristics that comes from a similar time period. So this is a school of art that ran from about 1865 through the 1970s. The big emphasis here is on how people see the world. So instead of making it photographically correct, like exactly the way we see the image, it's how we view the world. So how do we put our biases on certain pictures and certain scenes? Some of the little groups of groups of art within that are the Impressionism, Cubism, and Dadaism. There's also Surrealism and a whole bunch of other mini schools, but these are the ones that most people are familiar with. There's also the postmodern movement that started in the 1970s and is still going on. Postmodern art uses mixed media and a lot of collage. You're also going to see some emphasis on new technology as far as computers and video and everything else. So it's important to understand the background for how modernism came about. Before the modernism movement, art was used to document and to teach, and two things really helped art be able to be more about how we emotionally interact with the world and not have to do that. So one thing is the camera. The camera made it so that art didn't have to document day-to-day life. The camera was able to do the documenting for us. And the other thing is the Enlightenment. And with the Enlightenment, there's a lot of focus on individual rights and the idea of truth, and the idea that all people and experiences have equal value. So all people should have a similar education, which was a huge part of the Enlightenment. So because of that, art didn't have to educate as much because people were going to school. And art didn't have to document because photography could do that. So art's able to change. One thing is we're able to convey the experiences of the poor more realistically. Before this time, there was a lot of idealism because the rich people were the ones buying the art and they didn't want a bunch of graphic and sad scenes in their houses. The other thing is the idea of Impressionism can really thrive. So how people see the world, how we view certain situations, can be conveyed in art instead of art representing just factually what had happened. Art doesn't have to be a perfect representation of how people view the world. We already kind of covered this because cameras are able to do that. They can take pictures, especially handheld cameras, which became more popular in the 1960s. And then day-to-day objects can start to have aesthetic value. So one of the schools of art within modern art is Danish modern, and that is particular to furniture and how furniture was created and the lines and kind of the design aspects. So that's just an example of how day-to-day objects could be art. So an example that we're going to look at for how to understand how modern art changed the art scene is by looking at the Icarus myth. The Icarus myth is this story about Icarus and Daedalus, and Daedalus is the dad, and Daedalus is this really talented architect, and he puts together this amazing palace, and the king of the palace asks him to put this crazy myth, or this crazy labyrinth thing in it, which is like a big maze, and he puts prisoners in there, and they have to find their way out, and if they don't, then they die. And Daedalus did a really good job with it, but there's a trick, so that the soldiers can get out. And the king didn't want Daedalus to share the trick with any of the prisoners, so he put Daedalus in prison, which is not cool, because Daedalus did a good job, and then he unjustly gets put in jail. And he gets put in jail with his son, and they get frustrated because they're in jail when they shouldn't have to be in jail, and they notice that these birds like fly around their prison all the time, and as they fly around, they start to shed their feathers. So Daedalus collects all of the feathers, and they use those and their candle wax, and they make wings. And right before they're about to escape, Daedalus talks to his son Icarus and says, "Listen, son, you don't want to fly too close to the ocean, or the weight of the spray, like the water that comes up, is going to make your wings too heavy and you'll get drowned. But you also don't want to fly too close to the sun, because if you fly too close to the sun, then the wax will melt and you'll fall into the ocean and die." But Icarus is a teenager, and he really liked flying when he first tried it, and he didn't have very much caution, so he flies too close to the sun, and his wings melt, and he falls into the ocean. Now, originally, back when classical art is still a way of teaching people, this piece of art was used, or this myth was used to teach children that if they're too proud to listen to their parents, then bad things will happen. And this is a very, very well-known piece of art by Bruegels, and it's about Icarus, and Icarus is right there. And he fell into the water, and like one person sees him and is kind of pointing at him like, "Hey, look." And everybody else is just kind of looking away. They don't really seem to care. They go about life as usual. And obviously the story that Bruegels is trying to teach us is that if we don't listen to our parents and pay attention to caution, our hubris, which is overwhelming pride, our hubris will overcome us, and nobody's really going to care or try to save us. This is another representation. It's obviously a very scary representation of the Icarus myth. Icarus looks absolutely terrified. His dad is not stopping. His dad continues to fly, which says that same lesson even more. The idea that if you don't listen to your parents, there's not much that can be done to save you, that you're just going to have to deal with the consequences of your actions. This is a modern art representation, and obviously there's a lot that's different here. Instead of Icarus falling into the ocean, Icarus is falling onto what looks like a road. There are lots of people paying attention to him, and he looks upset, but not quite as like crazy upset as he did in the previous slide. In this one, there's a lot of tension. You can see that he's trying to brace himself, and in this one it just looks more like he's falling. This is the last one, and this is a really famous Matisse. He is really well known for kind of his cutout style of artwork. What he did was he painted a canvas blue, and then he cut out all these stars and Icarus and the black line here. And if we look at this representation, this is a lot different. If we can see the stars on the same plane as Icarus, then that means we're underneath him watching him fly, which is not emphasizing the fall as much as it's emphasizing the flying. And we also have this kind of flamey looking thing in Icarus's chest. It's where his heart is on fire because he's so impassioned by the idea of flying. So that is the modern art stuff that we have to talk about here. I also have a slide